For 4 years, the Emergency Response Division, or ERD, together with other Iraqi ground troops and support from the US, fought and appeared to win a grueling war against ISIS. But the terror group has risen again at the nexus of 4 provinces. It's an area home to strategic roads, oil fields and several mountain ranges, which provide a sanctuary for the militants.
There were widespread riots in Paris on Saturday as around 75,000 Yellow Vest demonstrators across the country protested over fuel prices and the cost of living. The French capital suffered the worst unrest for more than a decade, with homes burnt, shops looted and clashes with police. Here, rioters placed fireworks inside a police car. Speaking at the G20 summit, the French President Emmanuel Macron said the culprits would be punished.
For a few hours on Saturday, the Paris Opera District and the Arc de Triomphe were in the hands of Yellow Vest protesters as the anti-fuel price rise demonstrations again boiled over into violence. 287 arrests were made as the Interior Minister condemned professionals of disorder for orchestrating the violence. Some opposition politicians accused the government of allowing things to degenerate in order to discredit the movement. 95 people have been injured. One of the world's great avenues looked like a war zone on Sunday after a night of rioting between French police and protesters on the Champs-Élysées in Paris.
What's interesting about this moment is that some activists are describing it as a civil war, while one journalist told me it's quite literally the revolution.
In Paris, violent clashes erupted between police and protesters for the 3rd straight weekend. The clashes began near the Arc de Triomphe early on Saturday and continued into the night between police and protesters known as Yellow Jackets for their bright clothes.
Under the threat of full-scale war, it's time for martial law. Ukraine's president went on national television to address growing fears of a reprisal of a military conflict with Russia.
The number of Russian units deployed along the entire length of our border has dramatically increased. After the incident in the Sea of Azov, we had to provide Ukrainian forces with a resistance capability in case there's a large-scale ground invasion.
The flare-up of tensions comes after Russian forces fired on Ukrainian ships Sunday. They seized the vessels and the some 24 sailors aboard. Many have since been ordered jailed for 2 months, pending trials in Russia. To counter the increasing tension, the Ukrainian parliament voted for martial law in 10 regions along the border for the next 30 days. It allows the government to mobilize citizens with military experience, control local media and strengthen border controls. It's a step that's been met with mixed reviews.
Knowing that there have been attacks and piracy from the Russian side, I think it's positive. We have to be prepared for the worst.
Martial law was not declared before in 2014 when they were shelling my native city of Donetsk. The question is, why now? I think it was done now because elections are soon.
Moscow says Poroshenko is trying to drum up his popularity before next year's elections, while Kiev has blamed Putin for the very same thing. His approval ratings are at their lowest level since they dramatically increased after the annexation of Crimea.
Succeed. Forget about the people in London, forget about the establishment, forget about the detractors in the fake news media. The real people out there in the United Kingdom, we love you, Mr. President!
China's President Xi Jinping kicked off the party's 19th Congress today with an endurance test for his audience. In a nearly 3.5-hour speech in Beijing, Xi laid out a sweeping vision for the next 5 years.
高举中国特色社会主义伟大旗帜，决胜全面建成小康社会。
But the gathering of more than 2,300 delegates in the Great Hall of the People was also Xi's center stage moment to tout the achievements of his first term. And after 5 years in office, Xi is in more command than ever.
到处都是监控，每天装甲车啊，一些坦克啊，在市区里面走来走去。也没有具体的法律规定，没有它的一些尺寸。
现在是已经被限制这个自由的出行了，就是订票啊，我们高铁和飞机都不行。我给你演示一下，我们用这个 APP 来订票。
What does it say？
然后就显示那个出票失败，说我已经被法院依法限制高消费，限制乘坐 G 字头列车。
The security here is incredibly tight. There are armored cars on the street, police stations on every corner, and tons of surveillance cameras.
In the past year, police have stepped up security. The region is now under what's probably the most intense government surveillance in the world. Here, China is experimenting with futuristic spying technologies.
G20, a council of 20 major world economies, formed to put the world back on its feet. After the 2008 financial crisis, China, a nation that has contributed over 25% of global economic growth, assumes the G20 presidency in 2016, at a time when global cooperation is more critical than ever. China stands ready for member nations to join in, seeking to innovate through scientific advancement and technology, actively harnessing greener sources of energy to power China by 2030, with sustainability and invigoration in mind. China has injected new life into existing initiatives through the latest 13th five-year plan, with commitment to maintain a medium-high rate of economic growth. Mega projects like the Belt and Road Initiative are being built to spur interconnectivity and unify trade toward an inclusive world economy. Further demonstrated through AIIB and South-South cooperation. Hosting G20, China signals her commitment to member nations and beyond, to create an innovative, invigorated, interconnected, and inclusive global economy.
Taking his place among the rest of the world's wealthiest nations, the South African president had a warning for some of them.
In the economic sphere, as we note that the unilateral tendencies seem to be gaining traction, we should uphold the principles of working together, cooperation, and also multilateralism.
Yet cooperation appears in short supply at this G20 summit, with disputes over trade, climate change, Ukraine, and the death of journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
When you look at fora like this, G20, G7, UN, these fora should be solving these issues, solving these disputes, WTO included, and at the moment that doesn't seem to be the case, and that's what's quite concerning for multilateralism as a whole, for the rules-based system that has been the world order since post-war.
During a 2.5-hour sirloin steak dinner in Buenos Aires, U.S. President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart discussed their differences on trade that had led them in past months to exchange significant retaliatory tariffs. President Xi Jinping noted it had been a long time since the two had last met, and a lot of things have taken place.
Only with cooperation between us can we serve the interest of world peace and prosperity.
Trump predicted his relationship with Xi would lead to a breakthrough.
And I think at some point we are going to end up doing something which is great for China and great for the United States.
A new government report says man-made climate change is already damaging the United States, and it's only going to get worse in the coming decades. The congressionally mandated report from 13 federal agencies says climate change could shrink the U.S. economy by hundreds of billions of dollars by the end of the century. The report also warns of more dangerous western wildfires, longer heat waves in the southeast, and more powerful Atlantic hurricanes.
Jim Benham says he doesn't need a PhD to know that things have changed.
When we have a rain event, we're not getting an inch, we're getting 2 and 3 and 4 inches.
And what's worse, the 67-year-old farmer says all this rain isn't just bad luck. He believes it's climate change.
It doesn't take a scientist to know that you got a problem. That's what I'm experiencing.
And scientists agree. In the 4th National Climate Assessment issued Friday, 13 federal agencies warn climate change will reduce Midwest agricultural productivity to levels of the 1980s. Andrew Light, one of the report's editors, says evidence humans are causing climate change is undeniable.
The part of the country that's going to get worse fastest is actually the Midwest, which is the breadbasket of America.
The rest of the country doesn't fare much better. The report says sea levels around the U.S. have risen about 9 inches. By 2090, rising seas could cause $118 billion in property damage every year. Heat waves now last more than 40 days longer than they did in the 1960s. By 2090, outdoor workers could lose $160 billion in wages from extreme heat. In 2015, wildfires burned more than 10 million acres. That's larger than the state of Maryland. As recent wildfires like the Camp Fire have left California devastated, the report warns of hotter, drier conditions in the West.
Towards the end of the century, you could see the United States economy losing hundreds of billions of dollars every single year and tens of thousands of Americans dying every single year because of climate change. This is all avoidable.
President Trump has said that man-made climate change is a very expensive hoax, and last year he pledged to pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Accords. That's a global agreement to do something to slow climate change. But the authors of this report, a report oddly enough put out by the Trump administration, say for every dollar spent addressing global warming, we should expect $3 to $7 in savings.
As world leaders are set to gather in Poland to fine-tune the Paris Climate Agreement, President Donald Trump is continuing his push to dismantle Obama administration efforts to rein in coal, oil and gas emissions. He's putting aside warnings about the devastating impact of climate change.
Yeah, I don't believe it.
The US is far from being the driving force it was during the Paris climate talks under President Barack Obama.
And when it comes to climate change, that hour is almost upon us.
The euphoria of 2015 has given way to sober realization that getting an agreement amongst almost 200 countries will be challenging, as evidenced by Trump's decision to pull the United States out of the Paris Accord.
The Paris Climate Accord is simply the latest example of Washington entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States to the exclusive benefit of other countries.
An email obtained by the Associated Press under the Freedom of Information Act shows the administration withdrew from the Paris Agreement with no clear climate policy in place. The initial shock of the abrupt US retreat galvanizing international support for climate efforts. But the Trump administration's retreat may show governments and companies they can ignore global climate concerns and not be held accountable.
There's some signs in Australia. The new government in Brazil is obviously not a strong climate policy expert, but big countries like China and India and Europe have said, in essence, we're going to keep plowing ahead and we're going to even go faster and take up a kind of stronger role in leading this thing.
The State Department, in an email, notes that the US is still sending a delegation to the Poland climate talks, despite pulling out of the Paris Accord.
No, I don't believe it. And here's the other thing. You're going to have China and Japan and all of Asia and all of these other countries, addresses our country. Right now we're at the cleanest we've ever been, and that's very important to me. But if we're clean, but every other place on earth is dirty, that's not so good. So I want clean air, I want clean water, very important.
A rough start back to work for millions in the Midwest after the long Thanksgiving weekend. A blizzard is dumping more than a foot of snow and causing whiteout conditions from Missouri to Chicago and Michigan. More than 1,200 flights were canceled on Sunday as travelers scrambled to get home after the Thanksgiving holiday. In Kansas, parts of Interstate 70 were shut down due to icy roads and low visibility.
In my 19 years as a trooper, this might be the top 5 worst I've ever seen across Kansas in this area. People need to slow down. They need to stay home.
The treacherous conditions forcing the governor of Kansas to declare a state of disaster emergency. Dozens of school districts in Kansas, Illinois, Missouri, and Iowa also canceled school because of the weather. The fast-moving storm system is now tracking to the east, expected to hit upstate New York and northern New England on Monday.
Dose of patience to get through all this, between people just not making good choices and not being patient with not only the road but other drivers. Gets you in trouble every time.
An autumn blizzard blanketed the Midwest Sunday. Blustery winds and heavy snow swallowed parts of the I-80 and I-70 corridor, reducing visibility to zero and making driving nearly impossible.
We are literally driving and cannot see anything.
Accidents littered the roadways, while jackknife tractor trailers and disabled cars blocked highways and interstates. In Kansas City, a tractor trailer nearly pitched off an overpass after sliding into the guardrail.
This is probably one of the worst I've ever seen in Kansas. You can't see in front of you. You cannot see where the roadway is at.
In Kansas, the governor issued a state of emergency. Interstate 70, which spans much of the state, was shut down.
It was intense and relentless, and even though Sydney was warned to be prepared, it took many by surprise. More than a month's worth of rain fell in just a couple of hours. There was flash flooding all over the city. Drivers abandoned their cars as the waters rose.
The road seemed okay, and then all of a sudden there was just this wealth of water that came through.
And that's the wettest rainfall we've had in a day, that even a daily total there since 1984.
At times, conditions on the roads were deadly. At Thornlea, a man was killed in a two-car crash. Police clearly frustrated by people ignoring repeated warnings to drive safely.
We've already seen some idiotic driving today. We've been out and about ourselves, all the police are out on the road today trying to make it safer for you, but we've already had people speeding.
It wasn't just the road network thrown into chaos. Train stations at Lewisham and Town Hall were flooded, along with some of the trains. While at the airport, 2 runways were shut down, leaving passengers stranded.
We get zero refund and there's no accommodation and no car hire, so we're stuck in Sydney.
In Chatswood, what felt like a mini cyclone tore entire windows from this office building.
It was quite scary actually, because you feel like you're actually getting sucked out, as it were.
Houses were damaged too as the water rushed in.
You could see out in the backyard there was about 1 metre of water, and it was coming in through the cat flap.
And while residents scrambled to clean up, more wild weather is still on the way.
Limpopo facing yet another dry season. Communal farmers are the hardest hit.
To Africa now, where the Congo's latest Ebola outbreak is now the second largest in history. There are 426 cases of Ebola in the DRC right now. 379 have been confirmed.
Colleen Gill of Naples asking a question many of us would like to know. The Clean Water Advocate posted this video on Facebook Monday morning after finding a dead dolphin washed up on the beach near Central Avenue.
And I just want to keep showing people what's happening and, just give us a reality check and let people know the good days and the bad days.
Someone wrote, "This is not normal" in the sand next to the dolphin before City Beach patrol workers hauled it away.
And we've been here 18 years and never saw a dead dolphin on the beach, so it is an aberration.
The harbor master for the city of Naples tells us at least 4 dolphins have been found on Naples beaches since Sunday. A viewer sent us this photo of 2 that have been towed to the boat ramp at Bayview Park.
145 whales are dead after becoming stranded on a remote beach. The whales were discovered this weekend by a hiker. Half of the whales were dead by the time authorities arrived. The other half had to be put down as it would have been too difficult to save them. While whale strandings do happen each year, it's uncommon to have a stranding of this size. New Zealand's Department of Conservation is now investigating what caused the whales to end up on shore. Possible reasons could be navigational errors, sickness, or falling tides.
Hundreds of birds have fallen from the sky in The Hague, the Netherlands, during a 5G experiment to see how large the range was and whether the new wireless technology would cause any harm in the local area. News of the adverse effects suffered by the starlings was slow to break, as initially the birds died in small numbers during the first wave of experiments. However, when a further 150 birds suddenly died at the same time, falling into a public park, people began to take notice and investigate. What caused the death of 297 birds in a park in The Hague?
Canadian activists are sounding the alarm to save endangered killer whales. The reason is military exercises conducted by the Canadian Navy and the U.S. Coast Guard in an area inhabited by orcas. A sonar activity and gunfire are reportedly disrupting the population's search for food. We spoke to one whale watcher who believes the drills are a real danger to these rare mammals.
A pair of back-to-back earthquakes, the first one measuring 7.0 right outside of Anchorage. People racing into the streets. There's already reports of significant damage inside buildings. Some of the pictures emerging that appears to be a newsroom right there that we're looking at. People heading out into the streets, but then going back inside when yet another earthquake struck. 5.8 was the size and scope of that earthquake. They did an initial warning, a tsunami warning triggered in Kodiak for people to flee to higher ground for fear of a tsunami. That tsunami warning has now been lifted. There were no reports as of last check of any deaths or serious injuries, but this did cause significant damage in and around Anchorage.
Just walking up after this earthquake. Holy smoke. Look at this.
Hey, be careful with the clip because there's nothing hanging under the ground there.
Yeah, we got to be careful because we don't know what could happen. We need to get back off this. Can you get out of there?
There's no holding the clip right there. He needs to get all of that thing. He needs to get back in the car.
Yeah. Holy, that was sick.
Is the doorway safer?
The powerful earthquake that rocked Anchorage, Alaska, with dozens of nerve-wracking aftershocks still going on there.
The quake buckling roads, damaging buildings, and causing power outages. President Donald Trump assuring the state that the federal government will spare no expense to help.
The 7.0 earthquake rocking Anchorage, crumbling roads, sparking fires, and rattling residents. Surveillance video shows a mother racing to grab her son while the walls at her home shake violently. The doctor who is in surgery describes the terrifying moment when the operating room started rumbling like a roller coaster.
We had to basically just give the patient a big bear hug so the patient doesn't fall off the bed.
For a time, fears of a massive tsunami, the quake damaging the foundation of homes, buildings, and schools students ducking under desks.
We're gonna die, we're gonna die.
The ceiling collapsing inside of a local television station, the floors flooded and scattered with debris. The control tower at the airport evacuated, lights shut down for hours.
Foils 4, we're gonna evacuate the tower. We need to get it inspected.
Inside a local library, a sea of books scattered along the floors, goods littered in the aisles of local grocery stores. At one point, thousands left without power in freezing, snowy conditions with limited cell phone service.
This was the moment a powerful 7.0 magnitude earthquake jolted southern Alaska. It struck about 13 kilometers away from the state's main city, Anchorage, on Friday morning, and it was followed by dozens of aftershocks that continued to rattle nerves throughout the day. It buckled roads and disrupted rush hour traffic in and around Anchorage, but there were no reports of serious injuries. And the city was mostly spared major structural damage, the authorities said.
In the name of Jesus. In the name of Jesus. Hang on, there's going to be another one. There's going to be another one. Hang on. Hang on. Hang on. Hang on. Hang on. Get off the steps. Get off the steps. Yeah, get into the door frames. Into the door frames. Because there's going to probably be another one. We're still shaking. Get in the door frames. Oh, Lord have mercy. Oh my God.
It's okay, you're okay.
Sometimes everything feels too far away. No matter what happens, I will stay. But you waiting for another day. Take my hand and you'll be okay. Sometimes everything feels too far away. No matter what happens, I will stay. But you waiting for another day. Take my hand and let's go away.
I can shut down your power grids. I can paralyze your infrastructure. I can access the personal data of everyone in America. I am the enemy with no face, and I can't be stopped.
According to the Washington Post, men who like Donald Trump may actually have tiny wieners. Thank you, Washington Post, for finally giving us the journalism we so deserve. When I go and talk to my friends who are Trump supporters, I'll just remind them. When they say they support Trump, I'll say, but clearly the only reason you do is because you have a tiny wiener.